creating developing the image of Irish people abroad is really, fantastic thing to do, and it's really an honour of us this evening. So I'd like to welcome you all. We're very proud to have you here this evening. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. Our first this evening is Des Mullen. So Des Mullen is son of Des Mullen, a journalist with independent newspapers in Dublin. Des Mullen Sr. was one of the country's most celebrated and recognised. Des Mullen Sr. was one of the country's most recognised newspaper writers at the height of his profession. He covered the Second Vatican Council, the Six-Day Arab-Israeli War, the Biafran famine in Nigeria, and the wrongful imprisonment of Father Niall O'Brien in the Philippines. His reporting from Biafra in the late 1960s is the focus of the story in this exhibition. So we'd be very, very welcoming, very delighted to welcome his son Des Mullen to the stage to speak this evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here today at the Epic Museum to share just a few words about our father, Des Mullen, the other one, and the recognition of his work in this remarkable exhibition, Frontlines Honouring Irish Journalists Abroad. His 40-plus years journey in journalism began in the most modest of ways, in Ballinasloe, writing reports on local football matches around the East Galway area. Those early reports led him to a job first with the Munster Tribune in Clonmel, and from there began an odyssey through the provincial papers of Cork and Limerick. His path brought him to Dublin, first to the Irish Press, and then the Irish Independent, where his life as a foreign correspondent really began. Over the years, his assignments took him to some of the most challenging and extraordinary places. He reported from Jerusalem during the Six-Day War, from Cairo during the 1973 Egypt-Israel War, and from the famines in Ethiopia in the 1980s, among many more. But of all his experiences, it was Biafra in 1967 and 68 that left the deepest mark on him. We can only imagine what that was like. An American veteran war correspondent called Michael Mock described Biafra as a pocket of pain, immeasurably worse than any of the previous war experiences he had had, eclipsing the Second World War, Korea, Vietnam, and the Arab-Israeli War. Not just because of the death and destruction, but because of the use of starvation as a weapon that left 3.5 million people in Biafra dead, mostly through starvation, and the vast majority of them civilians. At home, this wasn't really spoken about. He never sat down to tell us the full story, at least not in a structured way. What we learned in fragments over many years in stories are from the news clippings and photographs that you see here tonight. To me, it seemed a mix of adventure and horror, glimpses of courage and compassion, and the quiet trauma that comes from witnessing human suffering on such a massive scale. He talked about flying in at night from Sao Tome on those old creaking DC-7s, affectionately known as Jesus Christ Airways, skimming the treetops, dodging radar to land at Uli on what was a makeshift runway, a stretch of highway briefly illuminated with paraffin lamps and just wide enough for the wingtips to clear. There he met Father Joseph Prendergast, known as the airport priest, who had turned that airstrip into the lifeline of Biafra, coordinating the arrival and dispatch of aid flights in impossible conditions. it was really the Holy Ghost fathers in Biafra who made everything possible for Dad. He was in awe of those giants of men, Father Jack Finucane and his brother, Father Angus Finucane, Father Tony Byrne and others who achieved extraordinary things, fighting famine, saving lives, defying Nigerian authorities to bring desperately needed aid. It was through them that he secured an exclusive interview ahead of the rest of the world's press with the Biafran leader, General Ojukwu. It was a real scoop in those days when getting a story out of a war zone was a battle in itself. He would sit there pounding the keys of his Olivetti portable typewriter that you'll see in the other room there. It really was the laptop of its time, but with carbon paper and absolutely no memory. And then dictating each report word by word over a crackling telephone line to Dublin, precise in its punctuation, line breaks, commas and full stops. Alongside him was his friend and colleague, photographer John O'Neill, whose haunting images of that time captured the human reality behind the headlines, the faces, the loss, the fragile hope. Dad spoke with deep admiration of the Igbo people and their desperate fight for freedom against an overwhelming greater power. Interviewing soldiers in the jungle, he found they were formerly students and civil servants, but now determined and brave fighting men for their young nation's survival. He recalled the horror of death by starvation, of skeletal children, their bellies distended on the verge of death, of the mother who tried to thrust her child into his arms, imploring him to take it. These were images that would haunt him. At that time, of course, I was too young to understand. In 1967, I was 4 years old. So while Biafra aid campaign was capturing the nation, the nation's heart, and galvanizing men, women and children to raise pounds, shillings and pence, whatever way they could, to help Biafrans, and giving birth to what we now know as concern worldwide. I was mostly thinking of what presents Dad might bring home. On seeing that photograph of him handing out sweets to starving children, I wondered, what kind of sweets were they? My sister Geraldine remembers the community effort, the sale of work in the house, our mother Angela sewing dresses from a ream of donated fabric, and boxes being packed with clothes in the hall. I remember one of those boxes in particular, because inside it, to my horror, was my favorite pair of shorts. My mother had included it in the shipment. I wasn't impressed. Also, I remember being allowed to stay up late to watch Dad on RTE's 7 Days program, and realizing that if it's on television, it must be important. Looking back now, I realize how much those experiences must have shaped him, and how through him they shaped us too. The work he did in Biafra and elsewhere left deep marks that he didn't always talk about, and it also instilled in him and in all of us a sense of empathy, humanity, and the responsibility to bear witness. It's something we are immensely proud of, and to see his work featured in this outstanding exhibition means a great deal. For me, it honors a man who believed in telling the truth, who respected the dignity of those he reported on, and who carried the stories of others with care and compassion. Thank you.
That is it. They are part of the history of Biafra and the sterling work of the Mullen. That's his son there. One of his sons there addressing the congregation here. And my name remains Maza Zayoba. I'm reaching you live from this epic event, 23rd, 2025.
I'm sure many journalists and many others around the world as a result as well. And there are several generations of Des's family here tonight, so I hope you get to meet them afterwards. Here at EPIC, we're only as good as our team, and certainly these exhibitions are only as good as